Like if you made the soundtrack to taking a huge bong rip, eating half a box of donuts, and then searching for Goth Girl on Pornhub, it would be Deftones. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we're going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, nu metal. Specifically, who are the big four bands of nu metal in the same way as Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax were the big four bands of thrash metal back in the 80s. So, like, if you wanted to make a nu metal battle vest, which patch should go across the shoulders? By the way, has anybody made a nu metal battle vest yet? Because if they haven't, they really probably should. And of course, most importantly, we will answer the question of who is the Dave Mustaine of nu metal. Also, I wanted to mention that I am streaming twice a week now on Twitch. There's a link to that in the description. Also, join the Discord if you haven't. We are up to almost 5,000 people now. It's pretty awesome. Also, a huge thank you to the sponsor of today's video, one of the more punk companies in the digital space, Private Internet Access. Private Internet Access is a VPN, which is a pretty punk rock tool to have in your internet toolkit. Basically, a VPN changes your IP address and reroutes all your internet traffic through an encrypted tunnel, hiding your browser activity from your ISP, network administrator, or cybercriminals. PIA's VPN can help you access content from other parts of the world that might be blocked from where you physically are located. And it doesn't have any bandwidth limits, so you have unrestricted access to all your content. Plus, PIA is one of the few VPNs that fully supports P2P file sharing and torrenting. PIA is available for all platforms and devices, and you can try it risk-free at the link in the description of this video. Use that link and you'll get 84% off their normal pricing. 3 years for less than $2 a month, with an extra 4 months for free. And there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so hit that link below. Try it out for 30 days to see if you like it, and you can feel a little bit more punk when you use the internet. All right, so the first question is, who is the Metallica of nu metal? The band whose commercial success, influence, and longevity really just stand head and shoulders above everybody else. And to me, the answer here is clear. It's gotta be Linkin Park. Because they're not just the most popular and influential band of nu metal, they are one of the most popular bands of really all time, certainly of their generation of like the late 90s, 2000s kind of bands, with over 70 million albums sold and about 70 million bands who have ripped them off. Because pretty much any rock band of the last 15 years or so would be lying if they said they weren't at least a little bit influenced by Linkin Park. For example, how 90% of current metalcore bands have a chorus that sounds, let's just say, very similar to Linkin Park. And whether people will admit it or not, Linkin Park was the entry point for pretty much this whole generation of the scene to get into metal. Like that hipster over there in his old school death metal revival band that's signed to a cassette-only label whose only digital presence is Bandcamp. You got it. Linkin Park was his favorite band in middle school, and when nobody's looking, he still watches that One Step Closer AMV, you know, the Kakashi tribute one. And there are even more similarities. For example, they also pulled a Metallica when they put out a couple quote-unquote sellout albums that their core fans hated because they weren't heavy enough. But I will admit that it is not a perfect comparison. For one, there's no Lars in Linkin Park. By that, I mean that everybody in Linkin Park seems like a very chill, humble, down-to-earth person. For example, a couple weeks ago, there was that thing where the interviewer on Twitch didn't recognize Mike Shinoda, and he handled it perfectly.
You came up here, you didn't tell me your name, so I don't know your name.
My name is Mike Shinoda. I play in a band called Linkin Park. She didn't know that. This is a great reaction.
So if Linkin Park truly wants to be the Metallica of nu metal, they're gonna have to change a few things up. For one, they're gonna need to get way bigger egos and maybe consider suing their fans like Metallica did. Second, their albums sound way too good. I would suggest they go back and remix Hybrid Theory to just completely remove the bass guitar and maybe give it a Saint Anger makeover and replace the snare drum with somebody banging on a rusty pipe with an old wrench. But with all of that being said, I think we can all agree that they are off to a damn good start and they deserve their place as the Metallica of nu metal. But when it comes to the next question of who is the Megadeth of nu metal, well, here it's not quite so clear. First, let's consider what are the defining characteristics of Megadeth. Well, the first one I would say is music that's almost aggressively mediocre, yet somehow attracts a strangely large fan base of people who think it's like amazing, and also a very, very bad vocalist with a big mouth. And so, of course, the first band that comes to mind here to fill that slot would be System of a Down. And I know this is going to ruffle some feathers because these days they're one of those sacred cow bands that you have to like, which is truly amazing to me because 20 years ago, it was the exact opposite. You were considered a clown if you did like System of a Down. But that aside, it does kind of fit. Surge's vocals are kind of weird and bad like Dave Mustaine's. Their music is certainly decent, but nowhere near good enough to justify this like god tier status that System of a Down fans seem to ascribe to them. So there are a lot of comparisons, but I think ultimately it falls apart. Number one, because Surge seems like a cool guy. And although they're not my favorite band in the world, System of a Down is certainly better than Megadeth. And so for those reasons, I am going to disqualify them unless things change and, you know, like System of a Down's bassist gets caught jerking it on Zoom or something. And if we were to judge this based solely on bands that have an obnoxious loudmouth frontman, well then clearly Trapped would be the frontrunners here. Because there's probably nobody in the entire genre who is more unlikable and off-putting than Mr. Trapped. But I have to disqualify them here because Trapped really is at best a one-hit wonder, and as much as I may dislike Megadeth's music, you gotta give them some credit. They have, I think, like 5 platinum albums, and you gotta respect that. And so I think this slot really has to go to Limp Bizkit, the second most popular band in nu metal with over 40 million albums sold, despite only having put out 2 albums in the last 18 years. I would also argue that just like Megadeth, Limp Bizkit is a little bit overrated by their fans. They're certainly not the worst band in the world, but they're far from the best. But for whatever reason, these days it seems like Limp Bizkit is everybody's favorite band. And I have to admit, I did not see that one coming. I did a review on my second channel of their new album. I was fairly critical of it, and people were not happy. Okay, that's a 1 out of 10. I didn't even need to listen to more than 10 seconds of it. They told me I don't know anything about music, that I didn't listen closely enough, that I'm old, I'm out of touch. I felt like I had somehow gotten drawn into like a parallel universe or something, because after 20 solid years of being the absolute most hated band in metal, suddenly just like the polarity of the universe flipped, and all of a sudden the gatekeepers are the ones defending Limp Bizkit. What a time to be alive. And there's a few other parallels, like both bands have great guitarists who are kind of secretly the real MVP of the band, Wes Borland and Marty Friedman respectively. Also underrated drummers, Nick Menza and John Otto, both fantastic. And of course the most obvious parallel that they both have very polarizing, obnoxious frontman. I mean, it would be easy to call Fred Durst the Dave Mustaine of nu metal, right? Although I do think that's a little unfair to Fred, because I mean, think about it, like Dave Mustaine's fans are the dudes with fringe haircuts who skipped school to go smoke cigarettes behind the 7-Eleven, whereas Fred Durst was like the template for every sexually successful early 2000s Chad with cargo shorts, DC shoes, a backwards hat, and a bad attitude. The kind of guys who'd pick a fight with you in line at Jamba Juice because they thought you were looking at their girlfriend. What the fuck are you looking at? Nothing? Alright, that's what I thought. And also, let's not forget Fred Durst smashed prime Britney Spears and possibly Christina Aguilera, and gotta give him some respect for that. But most importantly, Fred Durst in Limp Bizkit is really kind of playing a character. I'm sure that there's an element of him in that sort of red hat wearing bro dude kind of role that he plays in Limp Bizkit, but it is a role. He's said as much in interviews. I think he's a very self-aware guy, like when they came back a few months ago and he did the dad vibes thing to sort of acknowledge that that's who they are now, that he's a 50-year-old guy up there on stage, and he leaned into that rather than trying to hide it and relive the past.
Keep in mind, no hot dad riding in on a rhino. Got the roll on the rap with the dad vibes. Now everybody bounce with the franchise. Come on.
So clearly Fred knows what he's doing as far as managing his persona and brand. So my advice to you, Fred, if you truly want to be the Dave Mustaine of nu metal, maybe switch it up a little bit, get a ginger wig, become a birther, and it could still happen.
Did I read right that you were a birther? Did I read that you called into question where Obama was born? I read a quote and I wasn't sure if that was accurate. The internet can't be believed.
I have a lot of questions about him, but certainly not where he was born. I know he was born somewhere else than America.
Well, no, but then you were a birther if you say that.
No, I'm not calling a question to it. I just,
Yeah.
It's the point.
Now, before I go on, I want to address the long list of bands that I'm sure will come up in the comments and talk about why they didn't end up making my list. The first one is Mudvayne, a band that's had a really interesting trajectory in that back in the day, they were just one of the many nu metal bands that had a somewhat popular song, sort of a middle of the pack kind of band, I guess, like Alien Ant Farm or whatever. But now they've been elevated to god tier status, just like System of a Down. Now, Mudvayne is one of those bands that every 28-year-old metal dude seems to just absolutely worship because they heard Berber Dang when they were 12, and they still think that that is the pinnacle of music. And personally, I don't really get it. I mean, I think Mudvayne is just fine, I guess. They're certainly great players, especially their bassist, Ryan. So I can certainly recognize that, but I don't really get the level of like Mudvayne worship that goes on these days. And besides that, aside from their recent reunion shows, they've pretty much been inactive since 2009. So for that reason, they are off this list. And then there's all the bands like Coal Chamber, Kitty, Drowning Pool, blah, 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 that had a hit or two and definitely scratched that nostalgic itch for a lot of people watching this, but for a variety of reasons just kind of don't really make the cut of being in the big four of nu metal for all the same reasons that Violence, Forbidden, and Dark Angel were great bands, but didn't make it into the big four of thrash. And so with that out of the way, the next question is, who is the Slayer of nu metal? And there's a lot of things you could say about Slayer, but to me, the important part for the context of this video is that they were the most extreme of the thrash bands. They never put out a pop album like Linkin Park did. I love One More Light, I'm just saying. It was a pop album. They never put out a weird collaboration with Lou Reed like Metallica did. That one still kind of confuses me.
Worship, worship. Pain and evil have their place sitting here beside me.
And they never did whatever Megadeth was trying to do with Risk. If Slayer is anything, they are consistent. I mean, even Diabolus and Musica, which is their quote-unquote nu metal album that everyone seems to hate, certainly wasn't their best album, but at least it was still heavy. And so who is the Slayer of nu metal? The band that never went soft? Well, to me, the answer is obvious. It's Slipknot. I made a whole video about this, so I won't go into a ton of detail, but as popular as Slipknot are, I think people still don't really fully appreciate how much they brought death metal into the mainstream. I mean, their whole catalog is full of blast beats and double bass and growls and tremolo riffs. Even on their supposedly bad album, All Hope Is Gone. Like, this part would not sound at all out of place in a song by a band like Vader or Decapitated. And even now, 25 years into their career, they're still putting out stuff like their new song, Chapeltown Rag, that proves they have still got it. But that's not all. Both bands have this common thread of like a really solid core of boomer energy that fuels the band. Although, to be fair, in somewhat different ways. Like, Corey's just your classic get off my lawn guy, right? He fits nicely into the slot of the old guy who hates on all the up and comers, right? Classic stuff. And Slayer has Gary Holt kind of playing the same role in their band, like all his kill the Kardashian stuff, which is just so embarrassing that even just talking about it here in a video makes me want to like hide out of vicarious shame. Truly horrible stuff. What I find most interesting is Slayer's vocalist and bassist Tom Araya. He has kind of a more of a subtle, chill boomer kind of energy. It's very underrated. He doesn't really go out of his way to broadcast it, but if you think about it, he's really just your kind of standard South American Catholic dad. And a lot of people are very surprised by this. I'm not sure why, like maybe they just never paid attention because it's super obvious. For example, like their song Silent Scream, which is very clearly an anti-abortion song. So Slipknot's got a ways before they get to that level of boomer energy, but there is still time. Who knows? They could turn around tomorrow and put out an entire album that sounds like Corey MFing Taylor Can't Be Stopped, a whole album of Applebee's truck commercial music, and prove me wrong and show that they have sold out and gone soft. But until then, they are the Slayer of nu metal. And last but certainly not least, who is the Anthrax of nu metal? And I think of Anthrax as the most underrated and least emulated underrated of the big four thrash bands. I mean, obviously everyone knows who Anthrax are, but you really don't hear people talk about them the way that you do the big four, and you don't hear people like putting an Anthrax part in their songs the same way that you hear people talk about putting a Slayer part in their songs, for example. And so the question is, who is their nu metal equivalent? Who is the most underrated and least emulated of the nu metal bands? Deftones are one name that comes to mind. I'm sure many of you have already left an angry comment about how I haven't mentioned them yet, because, you know, that's how Deftones fans are. The ultimate in fake chill, and you certainly could make a case for including them. They've never had the kind of chart-topping commercial success that some of the other bands on this list have had, but they certainly do have an extremely dedicated cult fan base all over the world. They're like basically every 30-something horny stoner's favorite band. Like if you made the soundtrack to taking a huge bong rip, eating half a box of donuts, and then searching for goth girl on Pornhub, it would be Deftones. Bonus points if you get so fucking high that you turn into a 9/11 truther and flat earther like Stephen Carpenter. But with all of that being said, as influential as Deftones are, as much of a cult fan base as they've built up, I just don't think they've hit the level that it would take to displace the band that does deserve this spot, Korn. And you might be saying, wait a minute, are you the one that's high? I mean, Korn in the number 4 slot? The band that started nu metal is underrated? What are you talking about? And as weird as it may sound, yeah, I am kind of saying that. I mean, obviously they're a massive band and everybody knows who they are, but if you actually look at the data, they have the fewest Spotify listeners of all the 4 bands I mentioned here, 6.9 million versus Slipknot's 8.5 million. And as influential as Korn obviously is, I'd say that when I listen to current bands, I hear a lot more direct references to Linkin Park and Slipknot than I do Korn. And my guess for that is that because they are the creators of nu metal, I think really it's just a question of timing. Because remember, they're quite a bit older than a lot of these bands. They came out in 94, and the genre didn't really peak until maybe like 2001 after Significant Other and Hybrid Theory had come out. And if you're 30 now, you were 3 when Korn's first album came out, I think. So it would obviously be kind of before your time, unless you were that 3-year-old with an eyebrow piercing and dreadlocks and Adidas tracksuit rocking out to Korn. In which case, if you were, respect. And I think the other thing is that their style is just so unique and specific that it's really hard to reference Korn without just sounding like you're copying them.
Maybe you are not a fool.
So I think that's part of why you don't hear as many overt references to Korn as you do to Slipknot or Linkin Park. And also because so many of the things that Korn pioneered really just became ubiquitous. Like the down-tuned single-string groove riffs or David Silveira's kind of funky, groovy drumming, even like the way that they dressed. So I think there's a lot of stuff that people may do that is indirectly influenced by Korn, even if they don't know it. But all of that being said, for me personally, Korn are the kings of nu metal, without a doubt, and they would be at the top of my personal list. But as much as it kind of pains me to say it, for the sake of this video, I would say that putting Korn as the Anthrax of nu metal is kind of what makes the most sense. All right, my friends, that does it for this video about the big 4 of nu metal. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Tell me all about how I don't appreciate Deftones and System of a Down as much as I should. Check me out on Twitch as well. I'm streaming at least twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Join the Discord if you haven't. We're up to 5,000 members now almost. And also, thank you very much to everyone who supports us on Patreon. Patrons get every podcast a week early. There are patron-only channels in the Discord that I'm super active in. There's also a way to have me review your music or artwork or anything else that you would like to get my eyes or ears on. So if any of that sounds cool to you, hit the links in the description of this video. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.